This is 5 on 20 News. My name is Richard Aguirre.
And my name is Ziara Livier. We're coming to you live from our studio in downtown Tucson. It's Tuesday, September 12th. First, let's talk local headlines.
Let's do it. The Justice Department filed papers yesterday in support of vacating the criminal's conviction of former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio. In the letter, DOJ lawyers said that Arpaio's pardon by the president made the criminal conviction moot. It said a pardon issued before entry of final judgment moots a criminal case because the defendant will face no consequence that result from the guilty verdict. A MacArthur Justice Center and a civil rights firm sent their own letter to the same federal judge calling Arpaio's pardon unconstitutional and saying that the conviction should stand. Trump pardoned Arpaio last month, 3 days after appearing at a rally in Phoenix where he hinted at the move. Arpaio had not yet stood trial for the criminal contempt of court, where he was accused of disobeying a judge's order to disband his infamous immigration posse group. The group was accused of racially profiling Arizona's Hispanic population in Maricopa County. Current Maricopa County Sheriff Paul Pinzoni announced yesterday that he would conduct a review of the posse's groups and decide whether which, if any, should stay. Arpaio faced up to 6 months in prison if convicted. Instead, he gets to breeze through retirement with the comforting thought that the law doesn't apply to those who are supposed to enforce it.
That must be nice.
Yeah, just relax.
The Arizona State Capitol was dubbed one of the ugliest in the nation by the website Thrillist. The website put together a list of the worst state capitals in the country, and Arizona's was mentioned first. The author says that I've worked in many fair share of sterile, brutalist government buildings, but Arizona's State Capitol building in downtown Tucson looks like it was lifted from Bratislava circa 1983, a reference to the now capital of Slovakia, which was known for its drab Soviet-era buildings. The site says that in the 1950s, architect Frank Lloyd Wright planned to add gardens reflecting pools and fountains, but was turned down for the sake of fiscal responsibility. In 2009, Arizona actually sold the building off to private interests, again for the sake of fiscal responsibility. As is usually the case, the private company let the building rot away after cashing that fat government check. As ugly as the building is, it'll never match the ugliness of what's going on inside.
You know, it's an ugly building, but it has a really good personality. The case began yesterday over a retaliation complaint made by inmates at an Arizona prison. In 2014, 33,000 Arizona inmates won a settlement after they complained that their cancer went undetected and were told to pray to be cured after begging for treatment. The lawsuit also alleged that the medical staff at one prison failed to diagnose a metastasized cancer that resulted in an inmate's liver enlarging to the size of a pregnant woman. After the settlements, inmates involved in the suit were moved to cells with dangerous cellmates, forced into wearing jumpsuits, and had their possessions moved to another cell. In that case, the state did not acknowledge any wrongdoing. The inmates filed another lawsuit alleging that they were the victims of retaliation for testifying in the original case. Judge David Duncan said that the corrections officers cannot take disciplinary action against inmates close to the time that they testify or meet with their lawyers because it could be conceived as retaliation. He also said that there were 166 other inmates and that they could have switched instead. The judge also asked about the emails that had different formatting for dates and times and sometimes showed the incorrect day of the week besides the day. Daniel Struck, a lawyer representing the state, said that he would check with the technology team to find an answer. By checking with the technology team, Struck means that he'll wait until the prisoners die and the state dismisses the case.
Yeah.
Arizona lawmakers are moving forward with a proposal to impose work requirements and a 5-year limit on some state residents' access to the ironically named Access. This would make Arizona one of the first states in the country to add these strict requirements in order to receive state-provided health care. the state first suggested that the federal government tighten its restrictions for Medicaid eligibility, but an official request was delayed by over 5 months. Critics say that kicking people off Medicaid for not having a job would penalize vulnerable residents of the state and force them to use emergency rooms, which are much more expensive for the system. Populations that could be affected by the decision are those that take care of disabled children and elderly relatives. It could also disproportionately impact felons who traditionally have a difficult time finding work because of their criminal records, and those suffering from mental illness. Supporters of the work requirement say that the state's medical program is doubling by double digits and is unsustainable. They say that work requirements promote financial independence from government support are critical to maintaining the healthcare system. A representative from the Goldwater Institute, big surprise, says that Medicaid has become a poverty trap where people are not working in order to keep free healthcare. Although they didn't cite any evidence to support this claim, in 2016, the federal government denied a request by the state to include both work requirements and the 5-year limit because they would prevent access to care. But the Trump administration has taken the opposite view. In a letter to the nation's governors, the Trump administration took the same view, saying that the administration wants to approve state Medicare provisions related to training, employment, and independence. According to the request, working or participating in a training program for 20 hours per week would satisfy the requirement for all able-bodied people. This is defined as anyone over the age of 19 who is mentally and physically capable of working, with the exception of for anyone over 19 years old who is still in high school, who are sole caregivers of children under 6, anyone who qualifies for the Arizona long-term care system, or anyone receiving long-term disability. Arizona missed the March 30th deadline to submit its requests to the federal government, which is mandated under SB 1092. That law made it mandatory for the state to apply to the federal government to impose a 5-year limit along with work requirements. But state officials say that they will be submitting the request soon so that a decision can be made next year. So not only are they cruel, they're also useless. As for those cut off the Medicaid rolls, they'll be able to celebrate their newfound financial independence by dying alone in the street.
I like how you guys both knew what the Goldwater Institute was. You're like, oh yeah, these guys again. I know. I'm like, what's that?
Every libertarian cut off assistance always.
It's a conservative think tank.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, it's a conservative think tank. I forgot.
Now in national and international news.
I guess I just do comedy, okay, guys?
Now you can do Goldwater Institute.
Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley announced yesterday that he would co-sponsor a Medicare for All bill by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. In a statement, Merkley said that health care should be a right for every single American, not a privilege reserved for the healthy and wealthy. That rhymes. That's nice. He said that the healthcare system is incredibly complex and stressful, and that it would be terrific to have a simple system where you know you'll be covered just for being an American citizen. While Merkley says that the U.S. has made strides in expanding healthcare across access, he says the system remains frustrating for most Americans because of the cost and the complexity. In a tweet, Sanders thanked Merkley for his support. Bernie Sanders can tweet. Bernie has been planning to roll out the legislation this week, perhaps as soon as Wednesday. His bill now enjoys support for senators including New Jersey's Cory Booker, Massachusetts' Elizabeth Warren, and California's Kamala Harris. However, it's been opposed by the pharma and medical industries, along with Republicans and most Democrats, because they prefer that average Americans didn't have the same kind of health care as they do. That's not surprising.
Right.
Oh, really? I like him. He's cool. He does comedy.
He does, right? Mm-hmm. See, comedians can become...
Yeah, you're right. Maybe one day, guys. Maybe one day.
A A government watchdog is suing the Treasury Department for records related to a personal trip taken by Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and his wife, where they used a government plane. Mnuchin and his wife, Louise Linton, traveled to Fort Knox, Kentucky to see last month's solar eclipse. Linton posted photos of the trip on Instagram along with a series of hashtags bragging about the designer labels she was wearing to the event. The photos showed the two boarding an official Air Force jet, which presumably took them to Kentucky. However, a Treasury spokesman said that Mnuchin reimbursed the government for use of the jet. The lawsuit by the government watchdog Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, seeks paperwork related to the jet's use and justification for why Mnuchin had to use the government property. They also are looking to verify whether or not Mnuchin actually did reimburse the government. CREW has launched multiple lawsuits against the Trump administration. Another suit sought the release of records of visitors to Trump's Mar-a-Lago country club in Florida. Last week, the Trump administration said that they were not able to release the records, but didn't give a reason. Government lawyers asked for a deadline extension until September 15th so that they could have more time to come up with a good excuse for not releasing the records. Bet it will have something to do with the hurricanes. Yeah.
Timing, right?
That's why I didn't turn my homework in last week.
That's why I paid my rent late.
And speaking of the hurricane's impact on the White House, the Trump administration is walking back a proposal to kill an Obama-era rule that requires construction in flood-prone areas to build at higher elevations. After the administration saw the hurricane damage was a real risk and not a story created by the Chinese, they decided that maybe the rule was a good idea after all. In 2015, the Obama White House updated flood risk standards for the first time since the 1970s, according to climate models and risk of sea level rise. The new standards ordered that any federal funded building in floodplains must be built at higher elevations, especially for critical infrastructure like hospitals and fire stations. Sounds like common sense, right? But on August 15th, the president erased those standards by signing an executive order that buried this information in a larger infrastructure document. But it sounds as though the Trump administration is having second thoughts, which only happens as often as a solar eclipse. On Friday, Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert told reports that the White House might put out another executive order next month addressing the issue. Bossert said that we need to build back smarter and stronger against floodplain concerns when we use federal dollars, end quote. He added that someone like the president should make a rule that requires critical infrastructure to be built at higher elevations. According to the White House, all future executive orders will be written in pencil on highly flammable paper in case something like this happens again.
The United Nations says that ethnic cleansing is taking place in Myanmar as government troops continue to terrorize the country's Rohingya Muslim population. About 313,000 refugees have fled across the border to Bangladesh in a span of just over 3 weeks. In Bangladesh, the Rohingya live in cramped makeshift quarters built of bamboo and plastic sheeting and face discrimination from the local population. However, the Rohingya people still prefer this life to the one that they left behind. Over the past year, there have been numerous reports of murder, arson, rape, and persecution against the Rohingya in the western state of Rakhine. Aid groups are largely forbidden from entering the area by the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, and an official from the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights said that it is difficult to assess the current situation, but that it appears to be a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. The military began their crackdown after a Rohingya militant group attacked a series of military outposts on August 25th, killing about a dozen people. The military then retaliated with a violent operation that the UN says was clearly disproportionate and without regard for basic principles of international law. The UN pointed out reports claiming that Myanmar authorities were turning away returning Rohingya refugees if they failed to provide proof of nationality. However, the Rohingya are not recognized by Myanmar's government, so proof of nationality is impossible for them. Because of this, the Rohingya are essentially stateless, as they're not recognized in their home country and are attacked as illegal immigrants in Bangladesh. Other reports claim that the government set up a series of landmines along the border, presumably intended to dissuade the Rohingya from returning. Amnesty International confirmed these reports on Saturday and said that the mines have killed 1 man in the past week and injured 3 civilians. Among those was a woman who was hospitalized after a landmine blew her leg off. It's worth noting that Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1991 after opposing the military government of the country, which was then called Burma. She has been receiving criticism over the past week for turning her back on the Rohingya. If this was the standard for a Nobel Peace Prize, then Donald Trump might have an excellent shot in 2018.
We read about this one last week, right?
Right, that was when it first happened.
Yeah, it's a sad story.
Yeah, so at least it's good.
It's horrible.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Research and development for cancer drugs cost far less than has been reported, according to a new report published by JAMA International Medicine. The analysis shows that the average cancer drugs cost about $650 million to develop, much less than the $2.7 billion figure usually cited by pharmaceutical companies. The report was undertaken by Vinay Prasad of Oregon Health and Science University and Sham Melankody at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Center, where the pair identified 10 companies that each had a single cancer drug on the market. They looked up the company's research and development cost for required federal stock reporting paperwork to come up with the $650 million figure. The higher amount quoted by the pharmaceutical industry is normally used to justify the enormous cost of cancer drugs once they hit the market. It also shows that pharma companies are enjoying huge profit margins on these drugs. The study points out that each product produces 7 times as much revenue as it costs to research and develop the drug. The original $2.7 billion figure came from an analysis by the Tufts University Center for the Study of Drug Development. However, this analysis was based on about 100 new drugs, not just those used to treat cancer, which ended up skewing the numbers. The center also receives industry funding, so there's an incentive to use a higher figure when calculating the cost of the drug. Research and development, calculating the cost of the drug and research and development. But one difficulty for the new study was calculating the cost of failure. Drug companies often spend millions of dollars on products that either fail to treat the specific condition or are too unsafe to pass FDA approval. Since companies rarely publish how much they spent on failures, it's difficult to tally these figures. The new study estimated that each company produces on average 3 other drugs in development that cost money for research but aren't producing any revenue. The pharma industry, along with the Tufts Center, criticized this approach. They claim that the study misunderstands how much drug companies spend on products that end up failing to receive FDA approval. But the authors say this just proves that pharma companies should provide more open data to the public and assess how much they spend on failing products. A drug company representative responded to this. A drug company representative responded that this just proves that scientists should provide public data about how much they are spending on failing studies. Then proceeded to high-five himself for his sick burn.
Good one, Joel.
Good one, Joel.
This was 5 on 20 News with Ziara Livier.
My name is Rich Gary. Thank you.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube and Facebook accounts.
Yes, do it.
For all the latest Creative Tucson content, also feel free to bother us at info@creativetucson.org.
Wait, where?
info@creativetucson.org.
Oh, what?
We need help. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Bye.